why ABA in the education of students with ASD? Let me go through some background of why people think it's important for behavior analysts to be so actively involved with kids' education programs. There are many anecdotes that appear to support numerous treatments. ABA stands out because of its foundation in the collection and review of direct observational data, right? Just hardcore, if we see it, report it, it's the facts, there's no inferences made. If you Google autism therapy and autism treatment, you'll get back hundreds and hundreds of hits. I had a colleague who went to a conference in New Orleans a few years ago, and she did a poster on alternative treatments that are out there, and she had about 220 on her poster, and she said by the time she left the conference, she'd added with pen, 80 more, because people kept coming up, have you heard of this treatment? Have you heard of this treatment? And the reason that I mentioned that is, put yourself in the position from the perspective of a parent. If you're given this diagnosis that you weren't expecting, and then you happen to go on Google to find out what should you do about it, you're going to receive this avalanche of stuff saying, well, you should try all of these things. And there's a lot of funding for autism treatment for applied behavior analysis. There's a lot of funding in the States. There's a variety of different funding models in provinces in Canada. And when there's funding, kind of the worms come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and suddenly there's all these new fantastic therapies that can take advantage of funding. So be aware that the vast majority of what's out there doesn't enjoy any empirical scientific support. There might be fantastic anecdotes, pages and pages of parents or other people saying, I tried this and it worked. And that's very compelling. But as a scientist, I can tell you that anecdotes are really not worth the paper they're written on. An anecdote is just someone's opinion. An anecdote can be purchased or influenced. An anecdote is not evidence. An anecdote is not an acceptable standard or rigor of evidence, right? So we're not really interested in anecdotes. ABA, the anecdotes of ABA is it was expensive and hard work and it took a long time, but we've made progress, right? That's not as flashy as try this, try that, I'll cure your kid in a weekend, right? So, but we have the science behind us, that's the point. Research has shown behavioral treatment of ASD to be the most effective method, period. And there's a variety of citations there. How many of you are familiar with the NAC report, 2009, 2015? Not many. The NAC report, this is the National Autism Center. And what the National Autism Center did was they compiled a group of multidisciplinary experts, including behavior analysts, speech pathologists, people in education, et cetera. And they had them create a standard to judge the evidence, right? Because I could publish a study somewhere that says, I did this and it worked. And then you can look at whatever my strategy was and say, well, that's a research-based strategy because it was published. Well, one study, yeah, you could call it a research-based strategy, but it doesn't equate to evidence-based, right? Because it could be a bad study. It could be published in a poor journal. So just because something has been published somewhere once doesn't make it good science. What is good science is a standard of if you put multiple studies together with a number of participants from a number of independent researchers with rigor, and you look at it, and all of these studies together yield a benefit, that's an evidence-based practice, and that's what the National Autism Center did. And what I would encourage you, I couldn't include this in the handout, to Google National Autism Center Standards Report, 2009, and it was updated in 2015. And what the NAC report did was they applied the standard to all the most popular autism treatments and then categorized them. They categorized them into those who met their standard, and they're considered established practices for autism, evidence-based practices with the full support of the National Autism Center. A larger list of emerging practices, which have some research, developing research, but they didn't quite meet their bar. With more research, perhaps it will. And then they have unestablished treatments, the things that don't have any good research behind them, or maybe some evidence of harm. And you'd be surprised at some of the things on that list that are commonly recommended and popular in our local community, but the National Autism Center considers them unestablished treatments, not enough research to justify their use. Now, if you go to the top of the list, the 11 strategies or methods of addressing autism in the established list, 10 of the 11 are directly behavior analytic or behavior analytic derivative technologies. So the National Autism Center, which is not an ABA organization, is endorsing primarily behavior analytic strategies to address the deficits in autism. Additionally, the US Surgeon General back in 1999 endorsed applied behavior analysis as the treatment of choice for children with autism. So all of this is background to convince you of the role of applied behavior analysis in helping kids with autism. The third point here is that there's demonstrated effectiveness across the age range. As Deborah said, it used to just be this idea that it's for kids under 6, and then after 6, it doesn't work. Well, that's not true of anything, right? I could learn to play piano under 6 or under 10 or under 50 or under 100, right? We can learn at any point. And I had an experience this past spring that kind of reminded me of this. I was at a conference in Denver with a colleague, and Temple Grandin was speaking. How many of you know who Temple Grandin is? Everyone knows Temple Grandin, right? She's an autism celebrity. She's a rock star. She lives in Denver. She works at the University of Colorado. So the ABA conference invited her to speak. And I've never seen Temple speak before because although I think she's a fascinating person, to me she doesn't represent the spectrum of autism. She represents a really unique person with autism, but it's hard to generalize her experience to other people's experiences. But because I'm there and she's speaking, it's like, all right, I'm going to go see Temple Grandin. And I went with my colleague who's seen Temple Grandin speak many, many times and actually has been a sign language translator for her in the past. My colleague has seen Temple speak for 20 years. And Temple was proud to announce to us in Denver that she's turning 70 in August. Right? Temple Grandin turned 70. She's an amazing person. When they introduced her, she has over 400 publications. 400 publications. She's an accomplished animal scientist. But the point I'm trying to make, my colleague is sitting beside me, and we watched Temple Grandin before her talk. She's sitting in the audience for the prior talk, and then when it's her turn, she gets out of the audience, she's standing there, and people start going up and asking Temple, can I get a picture with you? And then suddenly it was like the Rolling Stones are in town and 200 people go up to get pictures with Temple Grandin. And there's Temple Grandin with her arms around people and smiling, and her talk has been delayed because she's getting selfies taken. And then she's up there, she's cracking jokes, she's going off script, she's making comments about the previous speaker. And my colleague beside me was commenting, you know what, having seen her over 20 years, from age 50 to 70, when she was 50, she was not this flexible. She would not have been doing these things. She would have been very distressed and uncomfortable. She wouldn't have had anyone touch her. She wouldn't have taken a picture. And it really kind of stuck with me, the change that can occur at any age, right? If my colleague can recognize this tremendous change and improvement in her flexibility in Temple Grandin from age 50 to 70, then why are we ever writing any of our kids off and saying, well, it's too late, right? He's 8, he's 10, he can't learn anymore. It doesn't work that way. So applied behavior analysis operates across the age range. In my personal practice, one of my kiddos is going into grade 12 this year. I've been working with him since preschool. Right? And ABA has helped him all the way from preschool when he couldn't speak and he had problem behavior and he was running away from school to now when he's going into grade 12 and he's going to go to university next year. Tremendous outcome. A lot of hard work, behavior and a team effort from multiple professionals. But ABA was there across the age range. ABA makes meaningful changes in people's lives through the use of procedures that have been demonstrated to work. So for the behavior analysts in the room, one of your exam questions had to do with what are the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis. I'm not going to bore the rest of you about the definition of applied behavior analysis, but one of the 7 dimensions of our field is that it's technological, that our science yields procedures that produce a technology of behavior change, right? This procedure has so much rigor behind it that we can take it, whether it's positive reinforcement or shaping or chaining, and we can apply these procedures in an analytic style to improve meaningful behaviors for our clients. So ABA should, like regular education and speech pathology and anything else, focus on meaningful behavior change, not esoteric behavior change. And so we're always sensitive to that we're working on behavior goals, right, learning objectives that are going to be meaningful to the child and are not just esoteric. Right? You should always be able to justify what you're working on, where it's going. Next, behavioral treatment or education is effective, has the potential to be life-changing, and early investments may produce significant cost savings in the future. There's some great studies showing that an early investment in intensive behavioral intervention, we're talking 30 to 40 hours a week, intensive supports in school, right? The kids who I've worked with who've made the best progress have had after-school therapy 5-6 days a week, in addition to their school programs through elementary school. It's an early investment. One of the challenges we have in our province is that we're very fortunate that a group of parents, very effective advocates, sued the government years ago, and the lingering benefit and legacy of their action is that we have autism funding, right? They wanted the government to fund ABA, and now we have $22,000 a year for ABA services and other services under 6 and $6,000 for over 6. So that's part of our early investment, but actually $22,000 sounds like a lot. It'll buy you about half the intensity that's recommended, right? We need to be supplementing more. Our kids need essentially 24/7 therapeutic environments because autism doesn't take a break, so our teaching shouldn't take a break. So we have this early investment. Unfortunately, the government operates election to election, not to benefit 20 years in the future, right? Organizations operate quarter by quarter. not 20 years in the future. But the research has shown if we do this intensively up front, that on the back end for many, many people will improve their skill sets, increase their independence, and decrease the cost of supporting them, or perhaps even eliminate them in the future. And there's a long-term cost savings. So if you are the case manager and you're responsible for supporting a child with autism in the school and coming up with the best strategies, and you go to the research to answer the questions, how should I support this student? Going to the research should guide you to applied behavior analysis, right? ABA strategies, not singularly and alone as part of a multidisciplinary team, but your search should lead you, if you're following the science, to ABA, right? A review of the research on the best educational treatments will lead to behavior analysis. Any comments, questions about that at this point? All right, if you've got questions, please write it down. Now we're at a slide that's not in your handout. It's okay. No one's freaking out. Top 10 reasons children with autism deserve ABA. I came across this over the last week in a listserv, and it's written by Mary Beth Walsh, who's a behavior analyst and also a parent of a child with autism. And these are her top 10 reasons, so I wanted to kind of quickly go through them from a parent's perspective. There are 10, but I'm only going to cover 9 because one of them was kind of weird. So I won't go into it. Number 10, children with autism deserve ABA because there is more scientific evidence demonstrating ABA works than there is for any other intervention or treatment, period. And I think I've just made that point, right? Skipping 9. 8, children with autism deserve ABA because it helps their parents to be the best parents that they can be for them. How many of you have kids? Lots of you have kids. Did you take a test before you had kids? Did you get certification, training? No, none of us did, right? None of us were qualified to become parents. We just biologically can procreate. So we're not qualified, we're not trained to help our regular children. And similarly, if you have a child with a special need, you didn't have special training as a parent for that child either. So I would argue that all parents would benefit from behavioral training to understand the benefits of training. Right? A lot of people say, your kids must be really good because you're a behavior analyst. I say, well, they are pretty good. The difference is when I do something wrong as a parent, I know that I'm doing it wrong, right? If I'm operating in a way that's not congruent with behavior analysis, I know that I'm doing it, right? If I'm letting them just be quiet in the back of the car, not reinforcing them, and then getting frustrated when they're not being quiet, I know that that's not good ABA, right? And that happens, I can deal with that. So what I talk about, all parents would benefit from behavioral training. Parents who have kids with autism in particular would benefit, right? Because your special child needs some special parenting strategies, because kind of regular parenting is probably not going to cut it. 7, children with autism deserve ABA because it will teach them how to sleep through the night and use the bathroom. Even though we're talking about schools and IEPs, school isn't the be-all, end-all environment for our kids, right? There's a lot of other stuff that's going on in other places. And we need to be sensitive to this, that we're not going to solve everything in the IEP and in the school. Parents also need additional help. I had an experience recently with a family where the family isn't very forthcoming with what's happening in their home. Everything's okay. And I work primarily with the school, and there was a lot of good stuff happening at school. The child was making lots of gains, and good things were happening, and whenever the special education assistant or the teacher would share positive things with the parent just didn't seem that excited about it. And which was kind of defeating to the school staff. Like, we're excited this is happening, why aren't you excited? And then it came to light that, he's smearing feces and he's not going to bed until 2 o'clock in the morning, and he's pulling my hair when I try and get him up in the morning, and life at home is really tough right now. And we didn't know that until it kind of came to light. So then we were able to take some supports and go home and help mom and dad fix what was happening at home. And then suddenly they came to school as new people, happier, now much more willing to hear about the good things that were happening at school because they weren't so stressed out at home. Right? So ABA will address all areas of development. The trifecta that we talk about and we teach in our program at Capilano, we address sleeping. I teach a whole course in sleeping. We do behavioral toilet training. I do a whole course in toilet training. I love addressing sleeping and toilet training because they're actually pretty easy problems to solve, even though they are the bane of existence for a lot of families. They're not that difficult to solve in most cases. And then eating. Right? One of my colleagues, Dr. Lauren Binnendijk, who's probably done a presentation for ACT, has West Coast Behavior and Feeding. If you've got serious feeding problems, we've got a local expert behavior analyst who specializes in pediatric feeding disorders. So ABA can help all of those other areas that are really important to the families having quality of life that aren't part of the school. 6, individuals with autism deserve ABA because it's the best defense against the tyranny of low expectations. How many of you have had the experience I've had where you're talking, you're meeting someone, what do you do? And it comes up that you might work with kids with autism. And they're like, that's so sad. What's sad about it? Why do you think that it's sad, right? I know a lot of people with autism who are my favorite people, right? They're the coolest people. There's nothing sad about it. Or they say, oh, that must be so hard. Oh, you must be so patient, right? There's this, you're laughing because you've heard this, right? There's a lot of isms in our society. Right now, there's a lot on the news about racism, right? But there's also handicapism, and there's symptoms of handicapism. And one of the symptoms of handicapism is treating people with a developmental disability as less, right? Not expecting as much from them because they have autism. Why should he have to get a job in the future? He has autism. Why should he have to, meet this expectation? He has autism. There's this tyranny of low expectations. And I hear from lots of people in schools that they encounter this in their school setting. It's predominant in high schools as well, right? A day with no screaming is a great day. That's a really low bar to meet, right? Well, what did the child learn? How did they advance their independence today? Well, they didn't scream or hit anybody. It was a great day. That's low expectations. And so having applied behavior analysis involved guards against the tyranny of low expectations, right? Because one of the defining characteristics in chapter 1 of my ABA text is ABA is optimistic. Right? ABA is raising the bar, is pushing. I talk about evolution. What's the next evolution? That's a term I use a lot with clients and schools that I work with. We've achieved this. Fantastic. We're so happy. Pause and celebrate for a second. And then what's the next evolution? Let's push it. Let's push it. We're never satisfied. We're always pushing. Why are you guys demanding so much of him? He's got autism. Right? Doesn't matter that it is autism. We have these high expectations. We have these pretty normative expectations. And even if we're not going to get there, it's better to aim too high and fall short, right, than to not aim at all. 5, children with autism deserve ABA because it can teach them the skills to make friends. Mary Beth Walsh in her article talks about working with, I think it was with her son. In the beginning, he was sitting on the floor with a therapist rolling a ball. And it took another adult behind him to prompt him to roll the ball. He didn't seem really enthusiastic about rolling the ball. He had to get token reinforcers to persist with rolling the ball. You might look at that and go, why are you forcing this kid to roll the ball? So, but we stuck with it, and it evolved, and it moved into the next thing, and there was peers, and now he has the ability, even if he can't talk, to walk outside at recess with a ball and toss it to somebody. And guess what's going to happen? The other kids will be like, oh, Freddie tossed me the ball. And then we have a little game of catch, right? And then Freddie can go and throw the ball to somebody else. Right? That's a quality of life issue. That's having some degree of friendship, right? And friendship is on a continuum. It can be much more sophisticated and involved than that. So it gives them the language skills, et cetera, to have that quality of life that we all expect for ourselves, having friends. Individuals with autism deserve ABA because it enables their parents and teachers to capitalize on their strengths and preferences, right? We are the positive reinforcement people. We are the next evolution people. So we want to identify what can the child do well and then use those strengths and harness those to teach to the areas of deficit. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we move along. 3, children with autism deserve ABA because it can teach parents how to respond in the moment. I think we're really going to get to this tomorrow when we talk about the dynamics of problem behavior, so that your first reaction when you're dealing with a challenge or something in the moment is not to kind of panic and not be sure what to do, but to be more analytic and thoughtful and kind of keep the problem small and simple and be able to respond more thoughtfully, more analytically, more calmly, more effectively. That's a benefit to parents when they understand behavior principles. And it's not just around challenging behavior. It can also be in the moment with, what if your child does something fantastic they've never done before, right? Recognizing that as an opportunity to reinforce and capture it as opposed to letting it slip and then wondering why it doesn't happen again. Children with autism deserve ABA because someday their parents won't be there for them. Developing skills over the long term guards against, increases their safety in the future. It's abuse prevention. Someday they probably won't be living with their parents. They're going to be out of their parents' care. The more skills an individual has for self-advocacy and safety and language and communication, the happier and the safer they'll be in the future. And 1, individuals with autism deserve ABA because it can prepare them to be their own best advocates. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the previous one. Of the more skills you have, the more likely you'll be able to advocate for yourself. I remember working with one of my guys who's now in high school and doing really well, but he started with pretty severe autism. He's had a great therapy progression and education progression. We had this IEP situation in grade 6 or 7. We're sitting around his elementary school with his 2 fabulous teachers who I love and his fabulous parents, and we're sitting there before school in the morning having our IEP, and he's sitting out in the hallway waiting patiently before school starts. And we're trying to come up with some meaningful jobs that he could do around the school. And we're sitting there racking our brains and coming up with the usual things, kind of demeaning things like, he can do the recycling, he can do the shredding, we're having a hard time coming up with more than that. And that kind of struck us. Why are we sitting here having such a hard time trying to figure out what he should do? Why don't we have him come in and he can tell us what he wants to do? So we did that, and everyone after was like, that was pretty awesome, right? We've never done that before. We've never thought to have the student come in and contribute to their own IEP. It's a student-led IEP. So he came in and he was like, yeah, I really do want to take out the recycling on Tuesdays. Those big blue things, I love wheeling those around. And so we were going to assign that anyway, but he got to choose it. And then he also said, I want to be on the AV committee. Great, we hadn't thought of that, right? We wouldn't have given him that opportunity. But he had developed so much from kindergarten, and his language and understanding and social skills, that he was able to advocate for himself, to pick AV in elementary school, which is like twice a year that they had to set up a projector or something. But then when he went into high school, he was in the AV club, and he made friends, and it blossomed as a kind of it was rooted in his advocacy for himself. Right? So I remember that example. And I always try to think of it, especially in IEPs where kids are maybe older, with more developed language. Why aren't we asking them to come in and participate in their IEP process and to advocate for themselves?